UFO Round Table, the UFO Thinker and Pursuit of the Paranormal podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the monthly Roundup Round Table once again with myself, Frank, UFO Thinker podcast, Ash and Greg, in Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast / UFO Identified. How are we doing, chaps?
Very good, thanks.
Very well, very well.
Good. And also we've got once again Dave Smethurst. How you doing, Dave? Back again after missing last month.
Oh, I feel bad, Frank. I'm like a phoenix. I've been really busy, and I'm like a phoenix that's risen from the ashes. One of my feathers are burnt, and I can't fly. So there you go. But anyway, I've got my beer at any rate. Yeah. So yeah, it's great to be back actually. And I'm sorry I missed last month, particularly after I heard what you're all saying. I could have put you straight. I'm only joking.
Yeah, well, good to have you back, Dave. And it's always a pleasure. So, as we discussed last month, Dave, I'm sure you caught up on it from listening back. The plan was to get stuck into this documentary, Accidental Truth, UFO Revelations. But before we get started on talking about that, I believe you wanted to kind of throw your 2 pennies in about some of the things we were talking about last time with Kirkpatrick and whatnot.
Yeah.
So
all it was, I thought, well, I'd leave the show for 1 month and listen to a lot of you. By the end of it, you're going, what a good lad, Sean. He's lovely lad. He's nice to animals. Oh, yes. I'm sure. Anyway, so as I was kicking my phone up and down the room, I thought, I can't be doing this. But more seriously, though, I'm just because I've been doing stuff, I've not had a chance to say much on it. So I keep it simple. But for me, with the Kirkpatrick thing, I think the big issue is he's taking a scientific approach to what acceptable evidence is rather than the courtroom standard of evidence, which I think needs to be applied. And clearly it should be an investigative approach, not a scientific approach. Well, because he's taking the scientific approach, there's no basic follow-up on the strong sort of evidence that's presenting itself. Or he just dismisses it. He's focusing on sightings, but a lot of the evidence isn't like that, and it requires a basic follow-up. Now, in my experience of all public policy stuff, the basic standards, the courtroom standard to initiate action, not bloody get down around a test tube and in the lab and say, oh, it's all right now, lad, the litmus paper's gone, so let's get stuck in. You do a proper investigative. If it's a good standard of evidence, then you move forward, and he's not doing that. So his mission is to find out what UAPs are and what their origin is, so not have some sort of high scientific bar that means he doesn't have to investigate anything. So anyway, I think he's narrowed down his definition of actionable proof, and that's the scope of his investigation. He's, as I say, he's just looking at sightings. And I think it's deliberate. That was all joking aside, and it was a good discussion you guys had, in fairness. I thought it was a pretty good discussion. But the question is it deliberate or is it an accident? And I think it is deliberate what he's doing. It fits with his foot dragging into the setup, not getting info from other agencies, making an excuse, and it's a bit like a more sophisticated version of the Brave thing of, oh, well, nothing to see here, low information zone. If only we could see it all, it'd all be dismissed, someone else's problem. And I just think he's trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but I think he badly misjudged the mood of a lot of people who were in there. And they're shifting slightly from nothing to see it to I'm not quite sure what we're seeing. That extraterrestrial thing was a red herring, the way he used that. Nobody was saying that like you guys said, and he's disparaging the witnesses. No credible evidence of advanced technology. I think that's ridiculous from an courtroom evidentiary testimony point of view. Again, the short term, it's somebody else's problem. It's not short term, it's a long term task of discovery he's been given. And I just don't think he's got any intention of investigating this. Ross Caltart said he's dangerous of misleading Congress based on what he said. Garry Nolan said science can and should be done in the field. Chris Mellon said there was loads of evidence already gathered. And Rob Sellers said he was part of the intelligence effort to suppress it all. So given that we have been, me and you, Frank, and to a certain extent you guys will have been doubting Mr. Kirkpatrick's credentials, for me, he's not only proved it, his heart's not in it, and there's rumours he may be gone, although I don't know about that. You know, I don't think he's the man for the job. So there you go. So that was my little rant over. And as I say, as you can tell, I'm not been very impressed with his efforts. But I may be being a bit harsh, but I don't think I am. So there you go.
No, fair enough, Dave, and good to get your take on it, as you were obviously missing last time, making up for lost time there. Yeah. So it's good. Just before we get cracking, them audio levels look all right to you guys. We're on a slightly different screen tonight for the listeners, so I'm just checking everything looks all right.
Yeah, quite high, but for you two, but
okay, that's cool. As long as
we
it's
don't
showing
tend to have a problem. Yeah,
yeah. On my one, it's just showing nothing, but it's probably.
Oh no, yeah, it's proper.
That's cool. Right, so yeah, little technical verification over with. Let's get stuck in to the first proper topic for the programming this evening. So as I say, this documentary, Accidental Truth, UFO Revelations, the little sort of spiel that they provide on websites and whatnot and in their press release is as follows, quote, "The truth can no longer be contained by those duty-bound to hide it. Officials who interact with the public regarding the UFO question openly acknowledge that they know things that they can't reveal. In Accidental Truth, UFO Revelations, the reality of an advanced intelligence engaging with humanity becomes undeniably clear," unquote. So it had some rave reviews, this film, and we were all quite excited to watch it. Hopefully we've all, or at least most of us, I think, have done our homework and watched it.
Yeah.
And I've been travelling around quite a lot with work recently, so I've had a chance to check it out myself one evening in a boxy hotel room. And I'll go through my thoughts quickly first and then hand over to you guys and see what you thought. So my take was, it did have a lot of the typical talking heads in it. I don't think anyone can deny that. It's kind of the merry-go-round of typical faces that you do see. And some of the folks that were on there, I wasn't exactly delighted to see, to put it bluntly. There was a bit of a distinct kind of lack of any surprise appearances from like somebody that we've never heard before. It was kind of typical, the ones that you'd expect, really. So no like big new revelations, from that point of view, despite the kind of, the title. I think, however, having said that, though, for somebody who's kind of not aware of all of the nuances of this topic, I reckon it probably could be quite a useful watch because it does dig in a little bit, perhaps a little bit deeper than some other documentaries that I've seen, to some of the areas and the nuances and whatnot. And it kind of goes into crash retrievals and material analysis and things like that, which was actually quite nice to see. Although there wasn't any kind of like new information, any of that, at least for me, because I suppose I've looked at that kind of thing quite a bit. So I didn't really necessarily learn anything brand new, but again, quite good for those perhaps who are not familiar with that side of things. I think overall, I have to say, probably wasn't really like my cup of tea. I didn't find it a terrible watch, but it wasn't really bad. It's probably just not really aimed at somebody like me who's kind of obsessed with this topic quite a lot and then looking into things in quite a lot of detail. There wasn't really anything in there that was kind of bad information or misleading or anything like that. But I just thought the overall tone is probably not exactly what I personally prefer. There was a lot of recreation footage and things in there, even though that was specified on screen that it wasn't real footage, which is a good thing. I'm not really the biggest fan of a lot of recreation footage, in documentaries and whatnot. And the narration style probably, wasn't exactly what I like and whatnot. The main issue I actually had with the production was this unbelievably overused sound effect. I was going to try and get the little snippet of the sound effect, but I thought they might do a copyright strike on me if I do that. But honestly, I mean, I might be more sensitive to stuff like that because I'm a musician sort of thing. But it really actually made it quite hard for me to get through it. Just like every 2 minutes, there was this sound again, and it's like, oh man, after a while, I was just struggling. But There's probably people listening to this who didn't even notice that sound effect, but it's like once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. And I clocked it after the first 20 minutes, and then it was just like, yeah, I found it a bit tough from that point of view. But as I say, not a bad film, probably not exactly my cup of tea. And that sound effect was sort of the nail in the coffin, I reckon, for me. That's my 2 pennies anyway. What do you guys reckon? Ash, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we all sort of recognised the sound effect that you were talking about. We hadn't actually thought about it in that way till you said it. I was like, I know exactly what he means when he, when he said that. But yeah, I mean, agree with the main points there that it's nothing new. It's typical talking heads with a couple of MUFON people thrown in there in the mix. Obviously, Nick Pope is. Obviously, you can't. I don't think you're allowed to make a documentary without Nick Pope in it. I think.
I didn't notice him in it. Was he in it?
I think that's the actual.
Yeah.
I think there's like an anti-copyright law that you have to have Nick Pope in a UFO documentary. CGI stuff, the recreation. I don't think that we needed a disclaimer that it was not real footage. I can't say it's the best. I mean, it's obviously a different way of showing it, but yeah. But on the main stuff, talking about sort of repeating stuff, if I had to hear that audio from the Nimitz videos in another documentary, they're always loud as well. I'm like, they're playing this audio again. There's another podcast that has it as part of his intro, and I have to skip it every time. I play that UFO podcast, Andy, take that out your intro. So every time I have to skip through 30 seconds just not to hear that audio again from the Nimitz. But anyway, on to the actual documentary. The kind of things that I sort of, I mean, yeah, there's nothing new in there for us guys. But what I sort of took a disliking into was they did kind of portray it as facts, a lot of stuff they were saying. Whereas a lot of it was kind of conjecture and sort of, we believe this, but instead of saying like, this is apparently or this is a belief, it's this is what happened. There's a lot of stuff on the documentary where that's, I don't know for sure that that's true. They're putting it across as it was true, so it sort of took a little bit of a thingy to that. And also, the narrator at one point, this is sort of maybe a question to ask you guys as well, is they said that whoever the narrator was, I think is an actor, said we have every right to know what is going on, sort of in the airspace, or a right to know what the government knows. So, I guess for me is one, do we have a right to know what the government knows? And two, who makes that decision? Who's the one to say, or what group is it to say, the public deserve to know, so we're going to tell them? So I guess that's a question back to you guys is, do we have a right to know? And who makes that decision?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and that whole thing is something I've grappled with a lot when I do my solo pods. You know, like is it perhaps in the public's best interests not to know what's really going on and what the government know and all the rest of it? You know, I tend to go along the lines of kind of increased transparency with the public, but within reason. Because obviously there is an entanglement with national security concerns and that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, I'd say sort of, an increased transparency is fair, but within reason to protect those national security concerns. And the people who would make that decision would be the people who we basically trust with handling national security concerns. You like to think anyway that they would be the ones that would be qualified to make that decision. And it's a difficult one, isn't it? That it's a tough question. What do you reckon, Dave? I can see you're raring to go there on that one.
All right, well, it's the old one Ross Coulthart says, to be honest, mate, I bloody wouldn't tell him anything. And that's what he says, isn't he? Oh, I can see why they're keeping it secret and all. But I don't know about that. I mean, I think there's a middle ground. But it's about accountability and democratic decision making. Clearly, you can't give away the whole farm, and there may be secrets you need to know, but there is a middle ground where you can give people enough information to make legitimate policy decisions on what we do without exposing, terrible secrets or whatever. So that for me is the big issue. I think there's a middle ground because what we've had, haven't we? We've had a secretive cabal in America or whatever, making a load of decisions on our interests that have gradually become their interests because they've done the cover up. And now we don't even know what the basis of the decision is. And so I think it's clearly a middle ground. I'm not going to go out. I'll wait to see what the rest of you think about the film. But they do tackle that a little bit at the end of the film, where they ask the question about the limits of disclosure. And they're a bit hot and cold on whether it's a deception or whether there's a need to know. So your question is very pertinent there, Ash, because they actually come to that in the end. And and it comes to the question we've often asked about these 4 stages of disclosure and where they're going to get to. Are they going to tell you everything, a little bit? Where's it going to be? But for me, it's not good enough to say, well, I'd keep it secret. And you've got to have democratic accountability in society. And we're quite successful as democracies in identifying where the line is, where we need to make a decision. And I think so that's the question for me. That's the answer. It's a nuanced answer, but it's still pretty clear in my mind.
Yeah, definitely. And the trouble is that we don't actually know what the government know. So then it's difficult to make a decision as to whether or not it's fair and reasonable to disclose that to the public, because it depends what it is to disclose in the first place, isn't it? Like, there might be something about this whole thing that the government know, where if they told the public, like, oh, why do you have to tell us that?
Yeah.
So we just don't know what they actually know in the first place, do we?
Well, the classic, Frank, the classic is, if the Earth was going to blow up in 5 years, would you tell us? Because it'd be absolute pandemonium, wouldn't it? And while we'd all like to say, yeah, I'm not saying that's going to happen, by the way, before anybody rushes out and starts smoking again. You know what I mean? But do you know what I mean? And we'd all think sitting there, well, I don't know whether I want to do that. I might want to have my last 5 years without knowing, really, rather than stabbing my next door neighbour for the last carrot in Sainsbury's, you know. So, but anyway, so yeah, that's an extreme example, and then you take it back from that, don't you? Sorry, Greg, I thought I dived in. I thought you might have something to say there.
No, I think you're pretty spot on. I think, like you mentioned, I think we do have a right to know what's going on up in the sky. But, like you said, Frank, what do they even know? They might actually be learning everything at the same time that they're kind of weird, like a step behind on disclosure of what they know. So a lot of these things that are coming out are stuff that they're learning briefly before us. Highly unlikely. And they touched on that in the documentary about everything. They're trying to sort of wipe from history everything before 2004, and I think that's something that we've discussed on here before. That before the Nimitz case was, or the Nimitz incident, that's kind of the turning point for modern day sort of ufology in terms of like history writing. I think when you had the 2017 New York Times thing come out about it, and 2004 seems to be like the modern era, and they're trying to get rid of everything before. It was interesting on the documentary that they were saying that they can't get rid of stuff before 2004 because there's so much out there already. But disclosure-wise, who is responsible? They talk about Majestic 12 and all that kind of stuff in the documentary. It's likely a group of people like that. I'm not saying it's that group, but it's likely to be a set of people, non-politicians, so sort of senior army, senior navy, that are in their post for decades rather than 2 terms of a presidential candidate. But my thought is that they're likely to be the people that are directing disclosure. Talking about the documentary, from the layperson that I am, that's not up on the UFO stuff like you guys, it was an interesting documentary. I didn't learn anything new that I hadn't seen really on anything before. And I know I've got probably a higher interest level than the normal person because of what we do with the podcasts and just my interests as a whole. But it was the same old people. Nick Pope on there. It was just a matter of when he popped up rather than if he popped up. And the more I see him on documentaries, the less I think he's got any credibility from my side of what he claims to have, or the seriousness of his role at his time at the MOD. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's quite as grandeur as he was making out ever. And considering what he potentially knows, I just think he's not brought anything new to the table, really. You got people like Lou Elizondo and people like that are bringing stuff to the table. And I know Lou has had his critics online. I know that. But one thing that I did like on documentary was the fact that Robert Bigelow was brought up. I did like that because Bigelow's very famous in like the paranormal side as well, Skinwalker Ranch, and also his space race, which doesn't get talked about as much as Elon Musk and people like Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos with their endeavors. But Robert Bigelow's actually a very intelligent, thought of guy, I think, in this type of field. And I don't think there's enough talked about Robert Bigelow. So to see him on a documentary was good. And Lou Elizondo was saying, yeah, I wouldn't even need to think about working for him. If he just asked me, it'd be an instant yes. It'd be like, when do you want me to start? So some bits were good. The CGI was not required, I don't think, but it gave the impression like to visualize what they were talking about. And that fucking segue music, that little sound effect, Jesus Christ. Every time I heard it, I thought, oh, Jesus. So I'm with you there, Frank, and you, Ash, and I think you, Dave. It was just one of those bits. It's like, fucking hell, at least do a different sound or something. It was just
right. I'm just glad it wasn't just me then, because I thought, am I just like really sensitive to certain sounds or something like? But no, I think
lads.
God, I got it after a couple of the times. I was thinking, surely not. Then boom, it came again. I was like,
I'm getting a bit worried listening to it. I think you'd all crack under questioning fairly easily listening to this if that's all it takes to set you off. Jesus Christ! No, it was very irritating, I must admit. It just struck me as you were talking, the thought that Nick Pope is a man whose own personal credibility has been outgrown by the credibility of the subject. So it's quite amusing, really. Because I used to quite like him when he was on in the late 80s because he sounded quite sensible, but now the subject has so much more gravitas that he's just not up to it, really.
The thing is now, I think with him, he's so far removed from it in terms of time that I don't get it anymore. The relevance of him is sort of waning from my point of view. Yes, you were in the MOD doing some kind of random desk job way back when, but modern ufology, if you go from 2004 onwards, you're nowhere near that, mate.
Yeah. Do you want to hear what I thought of this before we finish?
Yeah,
No, you're all right. No, carry on, Frank.
Just to
quickly, I won't take it personally, mate.
Just to provide the other side of the coin, though, as well. I think it's fair to say that Nick Pope has played a role over the years in the subject and things like that, which is, you don't
need to sit on the fence, Frank. Me and Ash take pride in the fact that on our podcast, we will say it as it is. But I get what you're saying.
As you think it is.
No,
sorry, I'm being a bit. I maybe have had a bit of Red Bull tonight, so I've been a bit arguing. I'm only winding you up. I mean, I like him a bit more than you two because I was quite glad to hear him actually. But as I say, maybe I've been a bit. You're making me feel bad now, Frank. I feel a bit harsh.
No, so do I. I'm just reiterating Ash's comments from last month. Was it last month when you were saying that he's always been really sound to you whenever you've reached out to him?
That's what made me remember that. I forgot. Yeah, well, yeah, it's a bit changeable, that Ash, isn't it?
Sorry, Nick.
Anyway, and just little slight defence of Nick Pope over with. What did you reckon of the documentary then, Dave?
Right. Right. Well, I agree with Ash. It was a bit of a polemic piece, and it's always a bit of an error that because once you start giving a bit of a political view, like a leader column, it's very easy to mix facts with opinion, isn't it? As you were implying there. So I'm never quite a great fan of that. I prefer the James Fox approach and all that. It's a bit more trying to evidence first and then opinion more, layered in a bit later on. The accidental truth, just for people, it's that the evidence of the cover-up shows that they exist. So that's quite interesting. It's a bit tendentious for me. That's it's a bit obvious. You know what I mean? But that's quite an interesting bit. I don't know really. Just the shorthand is I quite like the first bit, the revelations, the bit they're ignoring history, and the thing that is a favourite of mine about the fact there's a sort of this behind the scenes war about disclosure going on. But for me, it started to fragment after that, basically, and that was a bit of a worry. And what they did, they confused the chasers with the ones they're chasing. So they told the story of the people who we know, like the Hal Puthoffs and all these other people, the advanced theoretical weapons who were chasing and trying to look into the obscure window to see what was happening. They started to tell it as if they were running the program when we know they weren't. ATIP was running, they're not. So the central problem for me is they veered in between Crash Retriever, which was good, then what, as I say, the chasers were doing to find things out. And it all become a bit mushed up in the narrative. And for me, the central message is seems to be emerging now. There's been a core program, DOE, whatever they want to go into, is core program, reverse engineering that's been kept apart. And the lack of clarity in that bit of the film for me sort of gives a lack of clarity in our own sort of community narrative where these things blur a lot. So that was it. So basically, it started off pretty well and sort of fragmented into all these sort of half analysis points as we went through. But I thought it was, I did think it was good if you were watching it again, but I think it does this confusing the chasers with the chased, as it were, was a bit of a fundamental error to me. And I think that the limits of disclosure was a very interesting question at the end, where they weren't quite sure as you were posing us, whether it was just a deception or whether there was something they were holding back for good reason. So pretty good. Some of the talking heads I like, some of the ones not. And I wondered if it reflected the crossover in the different narratives of across the decades with all those different talking heads. So fragmented, pretty good, worth a watch if you're new to it, but quite confused in presenting what we now see emerging.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've pretty much covered all the bases on that there. Overall, not bad. I wouldn't say, avoid it or anything like that. But as long as you can put up with that sound effect, especially because there's people who listen to the podcast who are banging to this topic, who are researching stuff every day and sort of similar to what we are. And there's also people who listen and are just kind of curious and stuff like that. Perhaps don't have that much knowledge. For those people, it's probably not a bad watch. As long as you can put up with that sound effect. So anyway, shall we move on to the next topic? So this is another new case brought forward by Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, once again on the Weaponized podcast, who we always end up talking about on this roundtable, don't we? Because the funny thing is that we're always a bit last minute on these, because they literally go out at midnight the day that we record the roundtables, and perhaps they decide to do the big story at the end of each month or something, because it always seems to be the day that we're recording the roundtable. I don't know if it's just a coincidence or what, but anyway. So this is another one like that has very much kind of got everybody talking, all sides of the kind of viewpoints on the UFO Twitter and the wider kind of UFO community. So I've checked it out fairly quickly, and when we're discussing this, it's going to be hot off the press type of hot takes, as they say, for all of us, because literally it's only been a matter of hours since the story came out. But basically, this was something that took place in the spring of 2021. So like roughly 2 years ago, and it was dozens of US Marines that were being trained at the base at 29 Palms, and they saw a very large triangular, or what appeared to be a triangular-shaped object, described by Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp as a craft. Obviously, that is, I suppose, open to interpretation. And the thing that was interesting about it is that it sat motionless in the sky for over 10 minutes. And multiple Marines that were there present recorded images of this triangular object on the phones. And one of them had a low light feature, sort of capturing a setting on the camera, and caught a particularly good still image. And apparently the commanders of the base actually mobilised units to actually go and investigate, and dispatched helicopters and all sorts, and even fired flares off to try to actually illuminate whatever this craft was. And Jeremy and George have got multiple videos and photographs of this. And the videos, actually, you can hear the reaction of the people who are present in the background as well, which is always quite an interesting kind of thing to add into the mix. And there's also interviews with the Marines who were actually present there as well. And they reckon that this object was around about the size of a 2-story building, as the height of a 2-story building, and about as long as half of a football field. And pretty interesting one. Like I say, it's still sort of hot off the press at the moment, but I have been having a look on Twitter about this as well, just to see what some of the more kind of like reasonable and open-minded skeptics have been making of this. Because obviously, you're going to have your extremes of either side. You're going to have people who are like, see, it's the smoking gun, it's a UFO craft, and it's obviously a spaceship. And then on the other side, you're going to have people, it's obviously flares, what are you talking about, there's nothing to it. But those either side doesn't really interest me that much. But there's a lot of people sort of in the middle of that spectrum who I do like to go and check out. And I have seen an analysis that's been done that appears to show the lights from the beginning of the video to the end of the video actually lower slightly, which would suggest that it could be flares. Having said that, though, on the kind of flip side, the image that's an enhanced image that's with that low light setting, it really does to me look like there is some kind of a shadowy triangular shape behind the lights. So I'm a bit undecided on it at the moment. I mean, that thing about the lights appearing to drop throughout the course of the video does sort of look, that's the kind of the clearest indication that it could be flares to me. But as I say, the one with the enhanced image that does look like a triangle behind it, I've not seen a good explanation for what that is. So that's quite compelling to me that it could be some kind of a craft as well. So be interested to see what you guys reckon. And again, another one that'd be quite interesting to revisit perhaps next month when a lot more analysis has been done and perhaps more things will come out about it. So what do you reckon, Greg? Go ahead, mate.
Yeah, go on then. Yeah. So I've listened to the whole podcast this evening. I've checked out the videos. There's one of the Marines actually states, he said, nobody fires flares in like a 5-gun whatever shape or something. He said that's not how you would shoot a flare. He said it's definitely not a flare because this guy claimed that it's definitely not a flare. Absolutely adamant it's not flares. And you've got multiple witnesses of these Marines. It's like a 900 square mile base, something like that. So it's like one of the biggest bases around. They do all sorts of operations, testing, like military testing of units and practicing and all that kind of stuff. And they set off bombs there, all sorts of stuff. They mobilized like helicopters and whatnot to try and find it. So you would think if it was a flare or something like that, at least one of those people, especially high up, who had probably sanctioned this retrieval or chase group of people in helicopters and whatnot, would have known pretty quickly that was a flare. The picture looks really good, the low light setting. So all the iPhone does is with that low light setting, it just keeps the aperture open for a bit longer. Just like star mode or night mode. I've got it on my iPhone. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The reaction from the Marines sounds really good on the video. At one point, he pans round so you can get like an idea of what's going on and where this object is. It's very, very weird. And all of a sudden, for it to come out, that was another thing I picked up. It's like it came out, and there's been no sort of build up to it that I've seen that something big was going to be released, which is probably good on Weaponized podcast behalf. But yeah, I thought it was really good, personally. And I think all the signs are there that it ticks quite a lot of boxes. It's on a military site, so they should be able to identify anything that's flying over that. The top of that, for a start, you would like to think. Recorded on mobile phones, videos, photo. Jeremy Corbell also mentions the fact that they do have infrared footage as well of this object, but he hasn't been able to. It's not the original video, so he wanted to get the original video. So that'll be interesting to see what that would look like, because it was probably like some of the night vision stuff, but seems too good. Credible witnesses. The reactions all sound good. They're like, "Oh, we're videoing this as like aliens," and he goes on one of those guys that's filming aliens and stuff like that, and it all sounds too good.
Yeah, they very much sort of. I think the fact that there were multiple observers there who saw it, and you can hear them clearly in the background of the video saying, "That's definitely not flares. Like, I know what flares look like. I've been doing this for 10 years, whatever." That is definitely a feather in the cap of it being some kind of, anomalous object of some type. That's for sure.
They stated that they could see they could actually see the shadow of this craft. It doesn't come across on the video. And they also said about the twinkling lights, because it looks like flickering lights. And they said it definitely wasn't flickering. Now, if you record a halogen light on your mobile phone in your kitchen, it actually does kind of flicker a lot of the time. A lot of these new lights do that. So it's not, I was thinking it's not unheard of that this flickering light could just be a stable light. It's just the medium it's been recorded on. But
I tell you what I was thinking when you were talking just then, Greg, and I listened to the episode on Weaponized. I watched the video on YouTube actually because I wanted to see it first. But I was watching it basically like about half an hour before we started recording this, so I kind of skimmed certain bits of it. But I didn't notice any mention of radar. Did you? I mean, it may be that that wasn't mentioned. I don't know. Everyone's just
I didn't hear that mentioned.
So you would assume that there would be. I mean, they have to have radar stations there. It's a huge military base, so that would be. And that for me is like, I know I go on about it all the time, but Nimitz, you've got multiple different sensor system operators that caught this thing as well. That's the big thing that to me about that case makes me go, right, okay, now we're talking sort of thing. That is what I would love to see with this one. Because, I mean, if you get like a radar operator who comes forward and goes, yeah, I saw exactly the time that they're talking about, I saw this massive object on the radar, didn't have a clue what it was there for 10 minutes and then it suddenly disappeared, then that's absolutely huge. And then this probably becomes as big of a case as something like the Nimitz. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is anything like that. But who knows, the publicity that this gets now. It's only 2 years ago. The person who would have been manning the radar at that point probably, this could easily get back to them and perhaps they will come forward, What do you reckon, Dave?
Well, I'm glad Greg said what he did, because I roughly agree. I agree with Greg, because I thought I might have a U3. I thought I might be like that bloke in a bridge too far when he runs to get the supplies that have been dropped out of the zone, and then he just gets to the end and he shoot him in the back. I thought that'd be like this experience. And I also had, when I was watching the video, Ashy's holographic head over me going, oh, no. So I sort of agree with Greg that I thought it looked pretty good, but I couldn't see the triangle, which is pretty indistinct. maybe I need to go to Specsavers. It was silently hovering. I don't think it was flares. I think whoever said that's clutching at straws, because they showed a flare later on in the shot. That's one of the shots, isn't it? You could see the flare, and it wasn't dropping that much. I just wondered that it was over a military base, and it could have been another piece of equipment. But again, why would they launch everybody there? There was loads of eyewitnesses. Not thought of that, Greg, but it could all be a wind-up. That's interesting. Not thought of that. It's quite a good one. But given if it wasn't that, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people saw it. They did respond. I did think though, and as I say, with the holographic picture of Ash in my head, when they showed that picture at the end, its smile cracked a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Because I thought, sorry, it's a bit of a torture analogy, because I thought that picture was pretty good. Not conclusive. It could have been. It looked a bit more like the space shuttle than anything from a certain angle, but it was pretty good, that, and I thought that was all right. But you're dead right, Frank, and you should keep saying it. They won't be able to get the radar stuff because probably it's just come from the people and it's like a grassroots report from the soldiers. But that radar thing is so important to confirm these things, and somebody will have. So I thought it was okay. It's not the smoking. There's always something that seems to be lacking with the old Corbell things, doesn't it? But I thought it was pretty good as well with the eyewitnesses and all the rest of it. And that picture was really good. And I did wonder if it was part of the increase in the pressure or generally or specifically, because Mark O'Boyle asked that question in a Signal message today, and I wondered what I thought on that. And we weren't sure in the end, but definitely maybe it's coming out now. So yeah, I thought it was okay, but I still think there's a few flaws as well. And a military-based sighting, you never quite know what you're looking at.
Yeah, so what do you reckon, Ash?
So, I mean, it's a decent one. It's definitely got lots to discuss about it. Being on, obviously, military base, all the witnesses, always a good thing. My first impression when I first just saw the first pictures and the first video is flares, because I've seen dozens of very, very similar videos and pictures, and that's what it looks like. It's similar over Facebook. There's some particular ones that seem to get reposted all the time. And it's like, oh, I've been seen over this different town every time it gets posted. But it's just flares on repeat, on a loop. But just to clear up a couple of points that I've sort of noticed, I believe, so I've seen a tweet earlier, that the picture, the low light picture, first surfaced in like late 2021. So this isn't the first time it's been put out there. Obviously, probably the first time in this sort of level where people have obviously took notice to it with obviously the reach that Corbell and that has. I believe that. I did see the tweet. It was like dated 2021 with that same picture. And you can't edit tweets, can you? So from that angle, I don't think you can, but that's the way I've seen a tweet with that picture on. And the formation itself, I don't see the triangle formation. I've seen it in the Daily Mail. I think it was Josh and Chris Sharp at the Daily Mail with the article calling it a black triangular craft. And you can't see that at all, in my opinion. I mean, it's taken with an iPhone using, obviously, the different settings on there. And mobile phone cameras aren't designed to take pictures or something far away. They're designed literally for selfies. That's what mobile phone cameras are for. And it's not best quality. It's grainy. And it is colour bleed from the bright lights. Obviously, they blend together to then create what looks like an outline of something. So I've got it like sort of zoomed in on my phone now. And you can see where it kind of looks like something solid, but to me that is just colour bleed. So, another point is the formation in the videos. So watch all the videos. Not listen to the episode, but I watched all the videos and read audio face that's on the Weaponized website. Not a time to watch the episode yet. I was watching Garry Nolan's talk for our next segment. But the later videos, I say they do drop and they come out of that formation. They're not in the sort of the straight line triangle formation. Some of them do drop out of sync. So it's a solid craft, unless these lights are fluid on the craft, if it's a craft, which it could be. If it's a different creation, it could be, but they do appear to drop and move out of formation. And when it disappears from view, they've got it that it blinks out of view, which again is something that flares That's how flares disappear when they stop burning. They just disappear. So lots of good points. Quite a few bad points for me. I'm more on the side of it being something like flares. There's different types of flares that you use. And so the ones that they sent up to try and identify would be different flares to what was these, if they are flares, to what them ones were. That's why they appear different. Some flares last longer, some went out sooner. But for me, decent one to talk about, but my opinion is it is flares. And I think Mick West did a comparison from one 2019 where it's 5 flares. And these were flares by fact. And the guy that said on the video that they don't launch in a set of 5. In 2019, they had launched in a set of 5. So that kind of debunks that statement straight away. And they did match very similar to this set of possible flares. So yeah, that just backs up that I think it is flares.
Yeah, I must admit, I'd thought about the same kind of points, that there are different types of flares. So even though the flares that are specifically shot up to illuminate the object looks different to the object itself, it could just be that we're talking about 2 different types of flares, of course. And yeah, I have seen the comparison images as well with other flare drops, and they do clearly appear to have 5 flares, which sort of does contradict what the actual person in the background of the video says, where they'd never drop in 5s. It's like, well, there are clearly other versions of 5s out there. So it's a funny one. I think it's just going to be one of them, like you say, interesting to talk about, great to see. I mean, when I first saw it, I go on about black triangles all the time. It's like my obsession in terms of UFOs. Like, it's the one I'm most interested in by a mile. So I was like, oh, black triangle, can't believe it, but actually, hate to say it, but I'm not so sure about it. At this point, that's probably about all I can say, really, because I've literally done about an hour's worth of looking into it. But, the bigger picture will probably emerge as we go along. Did you want to add something else on that, Greg?
Yeah, just quickly. So there was a couple of points that they spoke about on the podcast. First one was it looked like a triangle from the angle of observation. So, but then they made a very strange off-the-cuff remark about pyramid shapes. And it was kind of, they kind of sort of like laughed it off very quickly, and it was not mentioned again, which I thought was quite odd.
I think that particular point is to do with the green triangle video that Corbell, because Corbell had called, he'd said that they were a pyramid shape because I believe that's what they were described as in the official report, even though the triangular on the video it's, and then Corbell got a lot of grief for calling them pyramid shape, and I think that's what that comment was. He was just,
fair enough.
I think he was kind of just having a bit of a laugh at himself, kind of thing. That's what that was. But if yeah.
And the other bit is Lou made a comment some time ago saying that there is a video of a black triangle out there that's legitimate. Now, I wonder if this is the video he's talking about.
Could
just
be
some points to think about.
As I recall, I think it was a bit older, that video, but hey, black triangle videos, the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
It's like a hunt the pigeon, isn't it? Do you remember that? Catch it, smash it, whatever it is, that thing. Hunt the black triangle, because you're right. We've had that before, and it's a really good point. I'd just also like to say that maybe the reason Ash's head was above me was because of the great analysis. That was really good analysis, counter analysis there. So very good. So maybe I knew he'd have a good point there. So that maybe it was just my guilty conscience making him appear. And finally, I think what it does show, a lot of them Marines, 2021, the phones wouldn't have been that bad then. Loads of them, they probably all have phones, and we still couldn't get a clear picture. So when we talk about that, it just tells us, but it's not as easy as we think using iPhones to get pictures. Somebody said, we should have millions of pictures. Well, I don't know, unless it's right in front of you. It's like the point you were making again. So I thought that was just an interesting illustration of that. But yeah, so that's a really good discussion about it. I think I'm not sure myself, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one at the beginning of next month's roundtable to just come back to it first point and just see what we all think on reflection. Once we've had a bit more of a think, so seeing other people's analysis a little bit more as well. Like I say, for all we know, in a week's time, a radar operator might come out and say, "Oh, yeah, I saw it on the radar," and then the whole case changes, doesn't it? Or that might not happen. I mean, we're not going to see the radar data, even if that does happen. But the testimony of somebody who operated the radar would be a game changer for that case, wouldn't it? But anyway, anybody got anything else to add on that before we crack on with the next point? Right. So, Dr. Garry Nolan, then, as Ash kind of hinted a little bit earlier on, is going to be our next point. So, Garry Nolan recently gave some very interesting comments at a conference, and this was the SALT conference, which is billed as a global thought leadership forum encompassing finance, technology, and public policy, with apparently, I think I got this right, previous speakers include US President Joe Biden, Virgin founder Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson, mustn't forget that, and former Google chief executive Eric Schmidt. So, really kind of high profile types of people that have been at this thing in the past, So I suppose, given that it's that kind of a level and the type of viewers that might attract, it really kind of gives even more significance to the points that Garry Nolan was making, and that he chose to make them at that event. Because it's very different talking about something on a UFO podcast that's, going to have however many people listening, and it's going to be a certain type of people who've already got an interest. But for him to really, as the renowned kind of very highly respected scientist that he is, go on this platform and make comments like what I'm about to say is, even more significant, I think. Really kind of quite mind-blowing. And I think his comments are pretty much the furthest he's ever gone in terms of like revealing, his own opinions, which is what they are, obviously, but obviously informed opinions of what he's been told behind the kind of curtain of secrecy that most of us don't get to go behind. So here's some bits of what he has to say. So, quote, just go and look at the number of politicians on both sides of the aisle who've come together and signed off on this statement. What are they basing their opinions on? They're basing their opinions on the dozens of individuals who, in one manner or another, have come forward and talked to them in classified settings. And he said, Garry Nolan said that he'd had personal experience with people who, frankly, I know have worked or are working on the reverse engineering programs. And he also went on to say that he knew some of the physicists on the inside who work at some of these big defense corporations, who basically said, here's how you tweak general relativity to accomplish that, in terms of what he's referring to there is the movements of how these craft operate. And then he goes on to say, but then how much energy is required to do it? Well, more than the whole nuclear output of the planet per day. Who could do that? We can't. Will we be able to do it in 1,000 years? But if we had any piece of this, let's say it's 1,000 revolutions ahead of us, 1,000,000 revolutions ahead of us, even a tiny piece of knowledge from that could revolutionize what we're doing. So then Nolan was asked, was he sure that humans possessed literal physical material to evaluate and to analyze? And this is kind of the key bit. And he says, quote, yes, 100%. It's there. I was working with a group about 7 or 8 years ago, and I literally got within a few weeks of gaining access to one of the objects. And when the people who didn't want us to gain access to it found out about it, they pulled some bureaucratic administrative tricks and snatched it away. Which is pretty intense stuff. And I was quite interested that he paused before he said object. I thought he was going to say saucer or tic-tac or craft, but he was like, object. I didn't want to quite go that far. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it.
No, I don't think so.
Interesting. And, so this has been kind of taken by many as a bit of an indication of how we're getting to some big reveal of some kind imminently, and the hype and sort of speculation within the community is has really kind of reached unprecedented levels recently. You can't really open Twitter or listen to a podcast without hearing about the big things, that are due to happen in the near future. And a lot of those relate to whistleblowers who have had involvement on reverse engineering crash materials of some type and whatnot. So I think, again, that gives these comments even more sort of significance, really, in the light of what's been being discussed recently. So what do you guys reckon of these comments? Is it a bit of a Garry Nolan firing the starting pistol on the race to disclosure, or just a guy expressing an opinion which is being a bit blown out of proportion? Bit of both. So let's go with you, Ash. What do you reckon?
I have to start with me being all negative. So I'm Dr. Nolan. I think I've spoken before. I'm not saying not a fan of his, but not the biggest fan. And with some of the stuff that he was saying, like sort of mentioned there, is it sort of true or is it one man's opinion? The way he's very careful with how he was saying what he was saying. And he was alluding to, kind of like the documentary we spoke about earlier, where they're portraying sort of opinion, but portraying it as fact. And some of the stuff he was talking about, so when he talked about Arrow and the sort of senators on both sides being for signing the document, he was relating that to that department is for ET, extraterrestrial, like sort of visitation, rather than as it is, it's unidentified, it's something in the airspace we don't know, it's for identification, it's the anomalous sort of research into what we don't know what it is. The way he was putting it across, the way he was wording it, was that it was an office, a study into ET visitation, rather than what it is. So it's sort of, obviously we know Garry Nolan's a believer, and that comes across in his sort of talk, which is fine, that's his belief, that's his opinion, that's fine. But it was kind of, like I say, putting it across as that was true. Like at the very start, when I talk about the 100%, like the moderator's asking sort of what level is this true? And it's like 100%. And he even says that's not my opinion. Like it is 100% fact that ET have visited. And he talks about obviously the reasons why, which these different departments being set up. But again, linking it to Arrow being ET rather than just anomalous phenomena. And then when he talks about crash retrievals and downcraft, saying instead of saying there's possibly downcraft that we've got, or he said we have got downcraft, he says these are to be ET drones or AI that have come ahead of him, rather than like a creature being inside the craft. It's a probe, a drone being sent to us. And the way he says it to me was that he's saying this is fact. We've got downed whatevers, and these are ET probes. And obviously none of this is like confirmable at this stage. And it might be in the next couple of years, but at this stage, and it just seemed a lot of very, very, obviously very big claims, bigger claims than I probably heard him talk about all in one go in the 15-minute segment. There's a lot of stuff in there. But it was kind of disappointing to me to see that side of it where he's just saying, this is what's happened. I was 2 weeks away from having access to these crash retrievals, this reverse engineering, but they took it off us. They didn't want us to do it. There may have been some department that they were going to get into, but there's no way saying that was going to be that sort of, they had some alien craft in that facility they were going to get access to. And they decided, no, we don't want these guys seeing it. It's all very his belief. So he thinks that was going to be what that was going to be in there, and they took it away because they don't want them seeing it. It's all very his beliefs, and then him putting it across as true rather than opinion. So that's kind of how my takeaways from it. Again, just being negative again.
Well, no. Hey, listen, mate. You know, we're only having a laugh when we talk about, you being the skeptical one or whatever. You know, it's totally fine, man. You know, I do the same thing. You know, you have to do that. You know, otherwise you end up leading yourself down some blind alleys and whatnot. I mean, I think, my take on it is it ties in with what Dave was saying earlier. What you were saying, Dave, about when you were saying about the documentary, how it kind of mixes up sort of like the people who are trying to find kind of the answers and the people who've got the answers and stuff like that. I think this is kind of what Nolan is saying there. is that he has seen enough through the work that he has managed to do that has convinced him 100%, which, like you say, is kind of his opinion, but at the end of the day, an informed opinion. He has been convinced that these things exist and are being held outside of what he's been able to get access to. But he has been able to get access to some stuff that has convinced him that, from what he has seen, that there is something else, and they were got into him very, very close to getting to whatever the full extent of it actually is. And I think that's kind of the thing, like going back to what Dave said earlier. A lot of people assume that Lou Elizondo has like flown a saucer or something. Do you know what I mean? Like Garry Nolan has like figured out how to work the engine of a Tic Tac and all the rest of it. But I think at the end of the day, these people are actually probably a lot closer than any of us in the public would be. But they're still essentially trying to get to the centre of that labyrinth, of where the best stuff is. Like, obviously, we hear about these alleged kind of sources being kept, or whatever it might be, fragments of sources, intact craft, or maybe even bodies and that kind of thing, and all of that is outside of the reach of even people like you, Garry Nolans, who've had pretty high level access to some of the best stuff as part of the work that he's done in for the government and whatnot. But I think for me, the really interesting thing there is not that Nolan has actually had his hands on a saucer and done the analysis on it, but he's been in that position where he's way closer to any of that stuff, the true extent of what is being held by the government than what I could ever be. And he is absolutely convinced and is willing to put his, very considerable professional reputation on the line in saying, look, I've seen enough that convinces me that there really is something there. And not only that, I got really close to actually working on it, but didn't get to. That isn't in itself like a total smoking gun that a saucer exists in a hangar, but it's pretty bloody compelling, in my opinion, that there really is something there. And I suppose the really interesting thing is the knock-on effect of the comments that he made there being a step further than he's ever gone before. What kind of pressure is that going to put on people? You know what I mean? What do you reckon, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to think about the context of this. That salt thing is a big investment, what they call it, venture capital, loads of big, serious money, Wall Street, all the rest of it. So, part of what he was doing there was trying to get funding for a lot of projects, scientific research. So he was going to go big on that, I think, and that's part of what he was doing. And I think in the effort to do that, and because there's obviously something happening as well, the combination of that, he went big. He went for the sort of Hail Mary statement, as he were. And they were massive. I thought they're massively impactful statements. He said, I get what you mean, Ash, because his first point, some of it was, the evidence was a bit referential in the end. I was referring to other things like the government legislation and all the rest of it. So I was a bit more convinced by the second statement about the recovered material, because I think he must have seen something like that. But nonetheless, like Frank was saying, he'd seen enough, and we don't know all what he's seen to go 100%, which was mega. But I do think there's merit in your point, Ash, as well, about it wasn't quite as strong an evidence base, and whether he couldn't say it all or not, I don't know. But I do think it's massive. And I did a tweet, and I literally woke up. I woke up in the morning at 3. This is how sad I am, this. And I put a tweet out because I was thinking, God knows why I did this, saying, hang on a minute, Nobel Prize nominated, whatever, just said 100% certain on these two things, and shouldn't it be front page news? And I got about, God, it was nearly 700 tweets in the end agreeing. Well, most of them agreeing. There was a couple weren't agreeing. Obviously, Ash Puppet accounts there, obviously. But no, I'm not joking. No. But there was a couple, but I couldn't believe it. Do you know what I mean? Because I thought normally it's me dad, and probably I get the dog to tap the keyboard to make myself feel better. But no, I got loads of them, and that is a big thing to me. What it wasn't picked up. The other interesting thing, though, of course, is who was he working with? Assuming it's true, who was the group? Because me and Frank were talking about this, and I thought, it sounds like, when they went for SAP States in 2009, all SAP, and Reed applied for it, and they were knocked back. And I thought it was that, but as Frank pointed out to me, the timeline wasn't right, even though it sounds like it. So was it TTSA? And maybe not. Was it some rump NIDS group, of Al Putoff and a few others, Steve, just coming together? or was it DARPA, which is it's the defence, it's the research thing that the American Army have, and they're linked to a lot of the stuff where they develop weapons. And Sharpie always goes on about them, so I always keep my eye on that. And Hal Puthoff worked for them for 11 years with Rick Doherty, who, funnily enough, in private comments, apparently he said he was full of BS. Rick Doherty, Garry Nolan said that, whatever. So that was a bit of a shocker. But anyway, that's an aside. The point is that, yeah, that sounds really interesting. But basically, the other thing was, what I wanted to say was, he said alien at first because he was talking to that group. And I think he just used it in the generic sense we use alien or used to use it. And he clarified it a bit later and went on. And interestingly, then he focused on he thinks it's AI, which he has said. But AI, if you've got a load of money, that's where the money, that sort of tech. And I thought he focused on that particularly because he knew that'd be interesting to that audience. Now, I'm not saying he's not a manipulative person like that. I think he's a truthful person, as he says it. But it is something you might focus on more because there's loads. He named about 6 possibilities, but he focused on that one because I think that would appeal to that audience because there's a couple of little, not dog whistles because that's the wrong phrase, but there were a couple of little appeals to people who might have a bit of money in new science to put in. So there's a bit of that going on as well. But yeah, I thought it was very, very significant and linked to these coming revelations. So yeah, but a good point I think from Ash there about it wasn't maybe as strong a statement as it appeared in terms of how we evidenced it.
Yeah, I think it's just, for me, the fact that we hear about this rumblings of whistleblowers coming forward having worked on, some kind of whatever the extent of the materials or craft or whatever it is. That's the stuff that really kind of, we were talking before about that triangle video, and yeah, it's really interesting and all the rest of it. But, it could be that in a couple of days' time, we kind of think about it and go, yeah, it's just flares and stuff like that. But, when you're talking about somebody who's actually worked on, like, supposedly a saucer, for example, that's pretty unambiguous in it, sort of thing. And I know we've not seen the actual saucer or anything, and we've not heard from the person who has worked on it. But at this point, we've got that, Nobel Prize nominated scientist, one of the leaders in his field, talking about how he personally knows people who are, what was the quote? Let me find it. People who, frankly, I know have worked or are working on the reverse engineering programs. And for him to say that, like, he's literally saying, like, yeah, I'm a really high up, well-connected scientist, and I know somebody who's literally working on a reverse engineering program. Pretty wild. That really gets my spidey senses going, you know what I mean? But, anyway, it's what I think the thing is, though, is that statement is really interesting, especially considering that we're hearing about these whistleblowers coming forward that have worked on that stuff as well. And what that could lead to will be potentially a lot more interesting. What do you reckon, Greg?
So I'm going down the Ash route a little bit. So Dave made a very good point. When you look at the audience of, this person, Dr. Garry Nolan, is speaking to a bunch of people they wouldn't normally speak to about a subject they would never normally talk about publicly. You have to question, why is that conversation taking place? Yes, it could just be an interesting conversation and having different, but if you're talking to people with a lot of money who are looking to fund things, you would probably ham up a little bit on the claims you're making. So there is a famous saying that says extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And apart from him saying 100%, and I've got mates, I'm well connected, did he provide any proof in that talk? And the other thing that always annoys me with these people, I say these people are the ones that all of a sudden become like this spokesperson, and over the course of like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, a little bit more of their story comes out. if the stuff that they're sitting on is so immense and will blow us away, why they not just come out on day one and just say, this is everything I know? Because they can see that money train. Why would you stop drip feeding that little nugget? Like, I'm sure Corbell and George Knapp have been sat on a lot of this stuff for a long time, and this gives them an opportunity to drop it and keep that going. So I think you do have to look at the audience that it's being projected to, not necessarily like the venture capitalists, but when they're saying something in an environment that they're not normally in, why are they doing that? What is the purpose? Because there's only one or two reasons why. It's to further the truth or to get money. And generally, it's money. People need money. They say it's the root of all evil, but it also is the stuff that makes the world go round. And people need to survive. I know that's quite an extreme look at it, but I do think you have to look at the money. Look at the money trail. Where's it come from? Who's funding it? And why is it happening?
Yeah, I hear what you say. I mean, a couple of things.
And that's not to diss anything, because it is some good stuff that comes out.
Yeah,
but you have to ask why now and why to that audience.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I definitely see where you're coming from. The only thing I would say about Garry Nolan is he is wadded, that guy. So
I was going to say that.
I don't think he's short of a few quid. So I sort of, but on the flip side of that, though, I think there is an element of it perhaps with Garry Nolan. You know, I've spoken to Garry Nolan in the podcast. I've spoken to him off the podcast, you know, as well. And I remember speaking to Garry Nolan a couple of years back before he was kind of seen as a figurehead of the UFO community in the way that he is now. And I suppose you mentioned ham it up as a phrase there. When you start to become like a figurehead for a whole community of people with a strong interest in this topic, is there like subconsciously an element of you want to push the topic forward on their behalf, and the more you become like a figurehead, the more you kind of feel an obligation to make big statements, especially when you're on a big stage like that. And perhaps what would have been 95% sure becomes 100% because you want the statement to have more impact in that moment.
Yeah.
I think that is a thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there could be a little bit of that there as well. But that doesn't necessarily make it like any less intriguing of a statement to make from somebody in his position. Do you know what I mean? At the same time. So it's, go on, Dave, what you reckon, mate?
Well, I'd like to apologise to Greg for pulling my face when he said that about none of the audience would have seen what is that extraordinary claim, because I hate that phrase. But like everything, it does have its place. And similarly, this clicks debate is, but I would like to apologise. And Greg, you are a lot bigger than me, so I think I better have before I see you at the conference or whatever. but like everything, it does have its place. So,
of course,
yeah. But sorry, I've just gone off. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, the click thing. Yeah, we've had this discussion about the click. The click thing, and it's all about context, isn't it? Because it is a good point about chasing, are people doing it or not? And what we come to in a couple of round tables ago was it's about the context of why they're making the remarks. And sometimes it may well be for clicks, and the balance of probability because of the context means it's that. On other times it isn't that. And I think in this case, A, because he's loaded, but B, because he wants to get investment in and he wants to push this forward, as Frank was saying. It's probably Occam's razor that he's doing it to more shock and awe than it is clicks, and what's it. But it is a good point, and I do think that concept was really quite important. But yeah, good points though, because we've got to get to the meat of this. It's quite subtle, isn't it? I think it's quite subtle.
And I don't for one moment, that's not me saying he is hamming it up just to get money and all that kind of stuff. But you have to think, why does anybody do anything? And you have to look at the whole picture as to why that statement's being made then and there to those people. That was it. So hamming it up was probably not the right phrase, but that was the kind of thing I was kind of getting at. If you see what I mean.
No worry. And when I mentioned hamming it up, I wasn't questioning your choice of phrase there, but I was saying I think probably is subconsciously an element of that. But it's not necessarily, I don't think, in Nolan's case, out of a desire to make money, because I think he's probably set for a few lifetimes at this stage. The things that he's done. But is there a potential to sort of like add a little bit more weight behind a phrase, knowing that it'd have more impact to push forward a topic that you now feel like you have a voice that can push it forward? Do you know what I mean? There could possibly be an element of that at play. But I also know from speaking to Garry Nolan as well in the past that he's often frustrated with how every little word that he says gets blown up into this huge thing as well. So maybe he's sat at home now going, ugh, you know what I mean? So I wish I said 98% instead of 100. You know what I mean? So, but as I say, we'll see how it all goes. And I think particularly interesting for me is the fact that I've, and everybody by this point has heard all of these kind of indications about some kind of big revelation being on the horizon, to the point where I'm a bit fed up even of hearing podcasts where people are talking about this now. Do you know what I mean? But the key thing that seems to be a feature in all of those stories that we're hearing is whistleblowers, particularly about reverse engineering programs. And I think Nolan's comments saying that he knows these people and making a comment about that specific thing, quite interesting. But that thing about things being predicted and whatever I think that might be something that maybe if it's not the next roundtable, the one after, I think we're probably going to be, depending on if you believe the rumor mill, we could well be talking about whatever this supposed big revelation actually is next month or the month after. And I wouldn't mind that happening. It'd be a cool thing for us to talk about, wouldn't it? I don't think we need 3 separate topics for that episode. If it's as big as everyone says, we'll just do an hour and a half on just that. But anybody got anything else to add? I think we're probably all good there, aren't we?
Just a couple of questions. I'm pretty thinking, bloody hell, this man shut up. But has anybody heard? I heard somebody said something on Signal today and on the tweet as well. I've heard a couple of mentions of a Washington Post article coming out next week, sort of with reverse engineering revelations. That's just people saying. Have any of you heard that? Because that's the first time I've heard of it. Did any of you pick up on that?
Well, I have heard that. Again, there's been so much hype and speculation around all this, whatever it is that's coming and all the rest of it. I think people are just taking stuff and running with it, but the things that I have heard that I find sort of like the most realistic involve a big article. And I personally have heard the name Washington Post being mentioned quite some weeks ago now as a potential thing. What I'm hearing is something along the lines of the New York Times article.
Wow.
I've also heard people talking about things like, a revelation, official revelation of what's going on from an official government body. I don't think that that's going to be the case, to be quite honest with you. I think that's just one of them where people have heard about something big coming and they've just kind of made a bit of a jump from one thing to the next. I think the reality of, some kind of whistleblower type thing, maybe through a newspaper like the Washington Post or New York Times or something along those lines. I think that's, if something's going to happen, it's probably going to be something like that. Are we going to see sort of like, an official person coming out? I don't think so. I mean, I don't like raw mushrooms, right? And if we hear an ex-president or something coming out, I will eat a raw mushroom on next month's round table.
Top draw.
Right?
Oh, yes, we'll have to hold you to that.
Well, hey, listen. At the end of the day, if Obama comes out and goes on a podcast and spills the beans, I'll be quite happy to eat a raw mushroom.
Well,
But
fair enough. I'll be quite happy to watch you.
I was gonna, I was gonna say I'll eat my hat, but I don't. Nobody wears
No.
hats anymore,
No,
do they?
no.
Really? So I have to be a raw mushroom. So yeah, that's my grim, sort of thing that I'm going to have to deal with if we do actually get some kind of official revelation. But I personally, as you can tell from that little promise I've just made, I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
I really don't. But do I think there's a possibility of something big coming out through a big article or some new whistleblower stepping forward? Could be, and I'd be very interested if that is the case, because I'm particularly very interested in that angle, the material and the crash retrieval stuff. What do you guys reckon? Let's have a quick whip round of predictions of what may be to come. Anybody want?
Mine's kind of not a prediction, but probably not even really what you sort of mentioned here. I just wanted to quickly mention Garry Nolan. It's that I don't want to see him go down the route of like Stephen Gray, where he started off, got the doctorate in medicine. Obviously, Garry Nolan works with medicine and diseases and all that sort of stuff. And whereas Stephen Gray started off really well with the Disclosure Project, quite a well-standing person, a lot of respect, and he's just gone off to now where he has no credibility at all. I just don't want to see that happen to Garry Nolan in 20 years' time, 10 years' time. I can't believe a word this guy says. He said all this, he can't back any of it up. So that's just, it's like an anti-prediction where I don't want to see this happen with someone like Garry Nolan, where now Stephen Gray and even like Linda Moulton Howe, where they've done really good stuff in the past, but now you can't give them any credibility because they do all these outlandish claims with not able to back any of it up. So it's just hoping that he can back it up in the future. That's my prediction, my hope for him.
Yeah, I think safe to say Garry Nolan and Stephen Gray are probably not on the best of terms with each other. Obviously, there was the Atacama thing, wasn't there? And that was Stephen Gray's kind of claim to fame sort of thing, and Garry Nolan sort of poured cold water on that one. So with his with his scientific analysis. Funny thing is that Garry Nolan really wasn't flavour of the month back then in the UFO kind of circles, because a lot of people really wanted that to be a non-human figure, and he basically came out and said, no, I've done the science, it's definitely human, and everyone sort of like slated him for it. And to think that then compared to how he is now is seen as like a figurehead, quote unquote, quite interesting. But do you reckon, Ash, just to kind of go back to that, you reckon we're going to see some kind of whistleblower type thing coming out? Do you reckon we're going to see an official government person reveal anything? Any predictions?
I think it's always just going to be around the corner. It's always going to be coming. I think that's where it is. It's always around the corner. It's never quite at the front door yet.
So will you eat a mushroom if we do get a whistleblower coming out in a major article?
I'll have a shiitake.
I think he's a bit careless with his corner management, don't you? He might come round and someone might be there one day. It'd be a terrible accident.
Yeah, well, we'll see. What about you, Greg?
Like Ash said, I think it's always around the corner. We never really get anything. But if anything was to come out, I think the New York Post was actually an interesting one, because that showed that they could put some information out and it be sort of respectfully taken on board by people rather than just rubbished in a tabloid. It was actually a serious article. So New York Times. New York Times. Yeah. I think if anything is to come out, it will be potentially something like that again. That would make sense because it worked well last time, and everybody seemed to win out of that. So,
yeah, I think what kind of makes me feel like that might be the case is that I remember hearing interviews with Ralph Blumenthal and the other people, Leslie Kane, and I always forget the name of the other person who was involved in that article. Helen Cooper, was it?
Anyway, I think so.
The people who were involved in that article, I've heard interviews with them talking about how for months and months they were kind of rewording it, trying to get approval of how to bring it out. And if that process was ongoing, especially like kind of renowned journalists like that, the word kind of would get out that there's a big thing in the works, wouldn't it? And that would be the kinds of things that people would talk about, and like the sorts of things we're seeing now. So who knows? We'll see, won't we, at the end of the day. So what do you reckon, Dave? What's your predictions then?
Well, I hope I don't see Garry Nolan with a load of flares under his arm. That'd be a bit unfortunate, wouldn't it? But, going down here, Breaking Bad with Garry Nolan, Well, I think, just to contradict you lads, I think, a couple of you lads, I think it is something is big's going to happen at the end of the summer, fall, as the Americans would say. Too many people have said it. I think there's too many people putting their reputations on the line. So I think we are going to see some. I think I'd heard about there's some sort of article before, but that Washington Post thing seems more specific, and that had been mentioned around that. But so I think there'll be some sort of paper revelation. I think these hearings are going to kick up rough. There's 3 potential ones: the Intelligence Committee, the Oversight Committee, and even the Transport Committee. But I think they might get a rough ride there. So I think that, but I think there's something else as well, or something else, I should say, chaps. There's something else that's coming, but we don't quite know, and it could be some exhibition, could be some, it could even involve NASA, although I will eat 500 mushrooms if it's NASA. Let me tell you, because they wouldn't tell you if you're alive, that lot, if they're taking your pulse. But anyway, so I think it's going to be some big revelation that we're not sure of. And I'm pretty sure whatever it is will be tied to Lou's book. My other prediction is that Dr. What's-his-name, Kirkpatrick, will win the award for the man who's pissed off the most whistleblowers with a single Senate hearing. I'm definitely up for that award. But yeah, so I think it's going to go large in the autumn, lads, like I was going on the Christmas Round Table. So I might be wrong, but at least I'm going down fighting, yeah. But I do think that. I think something big's going to happen. And I'm quite happy for Humble Pie, and I'm sure Ash will gladly, and Greg, and whoever, and you, Frank, will happily serve it to me, which I would fully serve.
Yeah, there you go, mushroom pie. I don't know where this mushroom thing came from. It's just I had a mate, not spoken to him for some time now, actually, not because of this, but just in general. And he used to eat raw mushrooms, and it just freaked me out. Like, don't get me wrong, I like mushrooms, but not raw.
No, man,
wrong about that. So yeah, I really do hope there's no official government figures coming out announcing something about UFOs now, because I really don't want to eat a raw mushroom. But yeah, anyway, so there we are. We'll have to just see how it all plays out. But I think that's about all we've got time for now. Be interesting to revisit some of this in future roundtables. We'll leave it there for now then.
Well, what an anniversary, lads. I really enjoyed that. It was great to get back into our fantastic episode. For anniversary, I mean, all what we got into. So that was great.
Yeah.
Whoever you enjoyed it, but I certainly did.
Yeah, it's a good job you mentioned that, Dave, because the rest of us have completely forgot to even say that it was an anniversary episode.
I remember saying it next month's our anniversary episode, and completely forgot.
Well, they all wait for us, though. Don't you think that? They all think, Christ, it's another round table. Get the revelations out. Gary, over to that SALT conference. Right, Jeremy, come on. Pull your finger out, mate. The round table's about to start. So, obviously, that's the truth. Yeah. That's the law.
Let's see what happens the day before the next round table. Yeah. Eh?
Right, yeah. We all get arrested anyway.
Right, spot on. It's been a good one, and I'll see you all next time.
See you all later.
Speak to you soon.
The UFO Round Table. The UFO Thinker and Pursuit of the Paranormal podcasts.